Oh,
Sorry, Pablo, I forgot to hit that. So sorry.
no problem. So yeah, we will be having this quick demo of how we are doing this at SUSE today. And then I also created and put it here on the goals. This one about sorry, doing basically the same on the for other distributions of people from Debian, the Gentoo, whatever other distribution we have, can also show how they are doing on their side. So we can all learn from everyone and hopefully improve all of us. So yeah, this is the only things I think we have planned. And then I think we wanted to also bring some discussion around Tiamat also for this today's meeting. So yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe we can start with this. Yeah, at some point we can start with open questions, Tiamat topic, and whatever else that we want to bring to today's meeting. That sounds okay for you?
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, as mentioned, this is just, well, I think, well, Alex is going to give us an introduction how we are doing, basically since we get the release from SaltStack Upstream until we are releasing this in our repositories, how we are doing internally. Yeah, so you have an overview. Yeah, so basically, Alex, yeah, are you ready for this?
Yes, let me share the screen.
Great.
Should be this one.
All right. Yeah,
Okay, is the size readable?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, we have different distributions. We have OpenSUSE, Leap, we have OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and we have SUSE Linux Enterprise. Leap and SUSE Linux Enterprise are more or less the same thing. Tumbleweed has a slightly different process at the end, but it doesn't really matter for now. So the general concept that we have is to have a lot of things in GitHub, and then we also use OBS to build the things in the end. So as we can see in this diagram, we start with SaltStack master. So here we have the Git repository. We have a tag for release. This is a bit outdated, but I mean the process is still the same. So when a new release is announced, we create our own branch downstream in OpenSUSE. This is tracking upstream, and it has some bug fixes. It has some big backports. So if we have something in the 3000 branch that's not in SaltStack master, then we also add it to our OpenSUSE 3001 branch. Then after that, we use a little helper tool to generate patches, and those land in a different repository called SaltStack Salt Packaging, and that is used as the basis for our packages. The reason behind doing this way and not differently, so we could, for example, create a release tarball of our own downstream salt repository, but we don't do that because we in SUSE we generally have the policy to take the upstream tarball as it is, and then if we need to change something, we put patches on top. And the number of patches for us grows over time. In Salt, it's quite large. I think there are other projects that have probably more patches than Salt, but yeah, it's one of the ones that have a few more patches. And then in Salt packaging, we have the patches. We just import them basically from Git's output of patches. Import them. We have the spec files, so what we use for RPM builds to have the recipe. I can show that later. Those mention all the patches, of course. And then one thing that makes it a bit easier for us is to use Git commit messages that will be the changelog of the packages in the end. And then we go over from OBS, from GitHub to OBS. So OBS is the open build service. And as such, it can create packages for very many distributions, different kind of formats. It can build container images. It can build OS images. And it is used for creating the distributions in the end, and all kinds, all flavors that we have. And of course, also just RPM packages. So as I said, we take the upstream tarball, and then we import everything from the Salt packaging repository. Take the Git commit messages and put them into a changelog format, which is mostly automated. And then we can submit it to OBS. Okay, so let's take a look at the Salt packaging repository where most of the things land. It's quite boring actually. So we have in Salt, we have a lot of patches, as you can see. If we scroll down a bit, these are all the patches that will be in our package. So in this case, it's Salt 3000. We also have a branch for 3002.2, which is actually 3002. Whatever the latest is, because we don't increase the version number for some political reason. Version number changes are always a bit tricky, but we can backport patches, we can backport security fixes, we can backport features that we really want. But we can't tell the customer or the user by increasing the number. So don't trust this number if you use our packages. And then we have all the packages and also the spec file. It's a bit annoying to look at it here. So let's go to a proper environment. So here we have a spec file. If you didn't see this yet, it's quite complicated, but then again, it isn't. But if you go down, we have a lot of source. We have the sources, the source tarball. This is parameterized with the version. And then we have the number of patches. One of the first, or the first is use a Salt user instead of the root for the Salt master. And that's in here for a long time already. And then the rest is added on top automatically. And then in the end, we have the package definitions, the build steps, and so on and so forth. If we go back to Git, we see in the Git log, these are the messages that in the end up in our package changelog. So for example, fix temp files.d configuration for Salt. And then we have a reference to a Bugzilla entry. So SUSE uses Bugzilla for tracking bugs, and our package changelogs need to reference these bugs so everybody knows that they are fixed or at least partially fixed. We can also see this MU 4.1.8 branch. That's because we also use more branches than just these version number branches, but that's a bit too complicated for now. We don't need to look into that. So now we have the changelogs as Git commit messages. Only one line, as you can see. There's no long style commit message, just very short ones. And now that we have those and we have the patches, then we go over to OBS. So where's my browser? In OBS, we have a lot of projects. If I look at the projects that we have, the list is too long to really grasp. So we have SaltStack. We have a SaltStack products one. The products one is more or less the main repository we care about, because it goes into our product, to our Sleep product, and to the Manager product. And then there's a parallel one for OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and the one for OpenSUSE Leap gets the same thing that's in products in the end. The only difference is that the changelogs might be a bit changed. So here we have some packages, for example, the Salt package. And here again, we have the patches imported. And one thing, it's very similar to GitHub, really. We have this branch package action, and that's like a forked repository. And if I go over to my one, it's then called home, my name, branches, and then the name of the project, and then it's Salt. And this is where we again have all the patches. We have the spec file. This is basically a complete import of the Git repository I showed you before. And the way this is done is by using this service file. So OBS has a service, and that means it's automatically cloning the repository. So if I run this, it will clone the GitHub repository salt packaging on the correct branch, and then it will create the tarball well, this tarball actually is not really needed in this case, but now we have well, if I look at the status there, nothing changed, or maybe something did change. Okay, so I was out of date. We have new edit patches.
Because this is products and not product testing, probably.
Right, okay. Yeah, so we split up, so we have a product, which is basically what we have in the product right now. And then we have a product testing sub-project where we run CI first before we put the things in product. It's a bit more complicated in the end, but this is more or less the thing. So yeah, right now we see we have a few patches added to it automatically. The salt changes is modified. That means something was added on top. You can also take a look at the diff. And we see, okay, we have this last revision that's about the current Git commit in the Git salt packaging repository. We have some changes down here. We have a few more things. So here the salt changes file. This is the changelog entry that I just added by running the service. And then I can submit this to my project. And then I can basically create a pull request. So it's called submit request, but it's the same thing. And then you get a request up here at some point, or rather, in this case, it's in the testing sub repository because we always go a sub project because we always go through testing. But then a request would show up here, and then you can take a look at the diff and you can review it. And once it's in products testing, we'll run our CI. So we have a tool called Salt Toaster that is basically running the upstream unit test and integration test in Docker containers, as well as some integration tests that we added on top. Also for different versions, like cross-testing and different operating systems that we run on. Because we don't only build for SLE and OpenSUSE, we also build for some other distributions, as we can see here. We have CentOS, Fedora, Ubuntu in this case. So we have different. So the Ubuntu packages are a bit different. We don't use the spec files, even though we can, because there's a way to transform the spec file to an Ubuntu package build, but we don't do that, at least not yet.
Yeah, one thing to mention, I think, is that on each one of those projects that we have in OBS, and that you can create an OBS, this creates, so the salt package is built on that project and is published on that particular project repository. So for each one of the projects, you can enable the publishing of the repository of the package, and then you get a repo having that package. So it's then really easy to just pick that repo, and then you will get the, let's say, the testing package of Salt with all the new, the latest patches, and then you can run whatever CI, install this package, whatever, do stuff, and at some point you can promote these changes to some other projects. Yeah, exactly. So you have here for each one of the even for your branches. So when you branch a package in OBS, you will get your home branch, whatever your name, and then the fork you did exactly as here for Alex. And then you get also a repository where your package with your changes are published for your whatever. I mean, you can build for a lot of distribution and also different architectures. So in the end, you get a repository where the package is completely built and published, and then you can pick it from there and execute whatever CI or test pipeline to validate this.
Yeah, and then in the end, this project, this SaltStack products project in OBS is then taken and the package is taken from there and added to the operating system. So that's the case for SLE and for OpenSUSE Leap. And for OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, it's very similar, just it's not SaltStack products, but just SaltStack. Yeah, and the changelogs, we generate them for each project in OBS differently, because we have to make sure that the changelogs are consistent, and we can't just take one and copy it over to another operating system, because that would might lose some entries. So we always do it. We track them in Git, and then we render them basically as RPM change logs. So for an overview, I think this is all that I had in mind. If there are any questions or something we should go into right now, I'm happy to do so. But if not, then we can also go over to Tiamat.
I have a question. How is the version numbering handled? So if you branch off and then do some changes, you have then packages built for with different content with the same version number, or is some magic done there?
So the version number stays the same, more or less. So even if we have, so do you mean when we add some more patches on top, what happens to the version number? Or
so for example, you need to fix something, you create a branch in your repository, do a test build, and this will get in version. But if you then merge it in the testing product, it will get built as well and will have the same version, or how is that versioning workflow going?
Okay, so we have in the RPM name, we have this is the version that we set basically. So that's 2002.2. And then we have this rebuild. Oh no, that's the release. And then we have the rebuild.
Release,
content. Yeah, so the release is the first one. And this is, so when I submit my changes and they are accepted, the package will be rebuilt. And then, well, and also the release counter will increase in this case, because it's a new release with changes on top. But
release part is actually contains the first one is the comment number. It's increasing from the source branch by 1 on the initial branching, and then increasing in every commit you made on the OBS side. And the next number is the number of build, and it's always increasing, and you can make sure that you always use the latest version on the content of the patches you applied to the package.
So for example, if you branch this and you add a lot of changes to yours, then yours will have a higher release counter. And therefore, when you have both repositories enabled on your system and you want to do an update, you would get the ones from your branch. This can sometimes be tricky when the release, so the release number can't go lower. If you have that, then you get the wrong package. But the version part of the package always stays the same. It's just the release one that goes up, and then the rebuild one. Well, it's not that important, really. OBS rebuilds your packages when dependencies change, for example, and then there could be one reason. It even tells you the build reason. So if I look at it, it says, okay, the source changed, that's why it was rebuilt. But it could also be for a different reason.
Okay, so you have the upstream version. This is the first part. The second one was the 9 there.
The 9, basically, you can see it as our number of changes on top, but not really. What's the best way to summarize?
The first part of the release number is actually the comment number, but it's increasing through the branches you made. If you, for example, made the branch from this particular project, you will get the release number first part of the release number higher for 1, and the next part is the rebuild number. If the package is rebuilding a few times after the commit, it will also increase by 1 each time.
Okay, so that's the 9 is a release, and but 1 is a rebuild.
Yep.
Yeah, and rebuild is just for the same release, so it's
so if you get the source code, the upstream version plus release is the same content always, and so rebuild only with the same source. But if you change the source, you increase the release. correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Peter here with a couple quick questions. They can wait if that's appropriate.
No, go ahead, please.
So again, the first is, I see you have an example here of SUSE packaging for other distributions. You mentioned CentOS, for example. My original question was going to be if you were just doing the client or the minion packaging or the full salt packaging. Seeing the screen in front of me, it looks like it's the full salt packaging. And kind of wondering, is that to help users deploy a consistent salt version throughout their environment and heterogeneous OSs? And if so, is there also a packaging for a Windows Salt client? And I'll step back for questions or comments.
Okay, so first of all, so for CentOS or Fedora, for example, it's very easy because they also use RPM, they also use spec files, and we can just enable it in OBS. And more, there are some changes in the spec file needed, but more or less it's very easy to get the same RPMs also built, including all the sub packages. So we have all these are the binary packages that we have. The reason we do this is mostly for the minion side, but we don't stop the other packages from building. So we also have a salt master package for CentOS 8, but so the main reason we have these other distributions is that we use them in our SUSE Mensha product and also in the Uyuni project. So Uyuni is a systems management tool, successor to Spacewalk, if you heard of it. And we have to support a lot of different client operating systems, and we use Salt as the base to execute things on the other machines, on the clients. And that's why we have to build our Salt package also for them, because we have some patches that we need that are not in the ones that are available on those systems. We don't support Windows, at least not now. And I think Windows is one of the few things that OBS also doesn't support. I guess it could change in the future if someone wants to add Windows support.
Nothing required from our side. It's just kind of an inquiry, and kind of, yeah, like you're suggesting, looking ahead at the future of potentially using this tool to help administer larger diverse environments. I have another very quick question if there's cycles, or if I can pause till the end or later. I'll hold.
I think you can go. I don't see anyone else jumping in. So
you mentioned your commits to the Git repository. In a SUSE environment, presumably they're all employees and staff. Is that accurate, or are you in an environment where you're dealing also with community contributors, such as the case with Debian, where, putting my cards on the table, I'm a long time Debian user since going back to 2000, 2001. I'm just now making my way into becoming an official Debian developer, but I've been contributing with the Salt packaging team for maybe the past 6 months and using Salt professionally and personally for several years. So just gave a little bit of background on myself and sharing how our community in the Debian Salt environment is assembled. One example. I'll step back.
Okay, so for Salt specifically, I think we rarely have community contributions, but it's just because we don't get them a lot, not that we wouldn't accept them or wouldn't help people out with it. There actually were some, so that it's not that there are none, but not very many. In general, OBS is public. We have a lot of community involvement in OBS. So for OpenSUSE, for example, the main difference, for example, between OpenSUSE Leap and SUSE Linux Enterprise is that Leap is the enterprise version plus a lot of community stuff on top. For Salt, we can take a look. So it all begins in the Salt repository, of course, because this is where the patches are then coming from. This is, of course, public. And if you look at the last contributions, they were all by employees from SUSE in the end. But if there are some in there that aren't, then that's also okay. It's not that we stop people from contributing. It's just that maybe it's also not that easy to understand what we're doing. So I try. This is also part of why we're doing this, so people understand how complicated we do it. But yeah, community members could definitely be a part of this process. I don't see why not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, in OBS, when you create some project, then you have members of this project that have, merge permission and this thing, but you can accept submit requests, which are in the pull request from, wherever. I mean, whoever. You can just create a submit request, and then you could get a review, the usual workflow as GitHub. But in the end, once you accept this, you have a package that is built. Instead of having only the code, you have a package which is built for the different distros or targets that you are enabled in this case. Yeah.
Thank you very much, all.
Okay. Is there any other question? Maybe. Let me check at the chat. Okay, yeah, Randy was mentioning that he's doing similar things regarding applying the patches with Tiamat in GoDaddy. So maybe now when we switch to the Tiamat topic, then maybe Randy can also give some introductions on how they are doing that. This thing, Alex, the bundle thing.
Yeah, very, very briefly. We don't want to go too deeply into this. It's also not completely done yet, but we also have something that is inspired by Tiamat, but it's not executed in the same way. Mostly because of dependencies and how we manage them, because we install nothing from pip, everything from RPMs that we package ourselves. Or other people in OpenSUSE and SUSE also contribute to those packages more than we do actually. So the dependencies are rarely maintained by the Salt maintainers and more maintained by other Python package maintainers. And here we have this VM Salt minion, which is basically a very simple thing. It takes Salt. Where do we have it? It's a bit. Okay, we have Salt minion. That's the only requirement. We install Salt minion. That pulls in all the dependencies we have on the system, and then we create a virtual environment somewhere down here. Where is it? In the build, we have this VMJ script which creates a virtual environment. Also creates text files that include which files we have and which we don't, or which packages are included in this blob in the end. And then we wrap that up in RPM, and that has the same use as Tiamat to ship all the dependencies, have everything in one place, and then deploy it on the system and manage it without having to care about too many of the dependencies on that system and interfering with version incompatibilities. For example, CentOS 7 doesn't have Python 7, Python 3 in a high enough version for Salt.
Right. Can I talk to you about this offline, actually? I don't want to soak up time here.
Of course, but we can also now move over to the Tiamat topic, and I don't know if you have some things that are related or not, but yeah, we can, of course, also talk offline.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex, for this tour about the release process. So we have already consumed some time, so let's move to the Tiamat topic. I think that, someone wanted to introduce this or so maybe Randy. I'm not sure who is going to drive this discussion.
So to talk about Salt being packaged up with Tiamat. So Bryce is going to be here, but since we just tagged for the point release, he's a little bit busy, but Randy, you can probably talk to it.
Which parts do you want me to talk about?
Just a brief overview if you want to, if you even want to talk about what we're doing there. I think you probably know enough to talk about high level Salt being packaged with Tiamat.
Right. So for those who aren't familiar with Tiamat, effectively what it is a pop wrapper around PyInstaller currently. So it's used for building Wonder and OneFile PyInstaller binaries. Effectively, what it does is as Alexander was just showing with his stuff, is it will build whatever code base you're pointed at within your configuration files. So in the case of Salt, that would be Salt. And it will pull in all of the dependencies of that project via requirements files or via source package files. And then it will actually pull in the shared object libraries as well into the binary. That provides a dynamic binary. And then basically what the team has been doing is to further make that more static, is they use an application called StaticX, or a pip library called StaticX, to fully make the package static. So to my knowledge so far, there are a couple of issues preventing Tiamat from making it out of beta, one of which was brought to me by Megan. They seem to be having an issue where systemd is unable to properly launch the Tiamat binaries that they have. I have investigated that, and I believe I have the root cause of it figured out. However, I haven't been able to get the time to meet with Megan to run that down. Some other issues are that, like I can't say his name, Aman brought up today, is that for Debian, it appears that anything that requires Python 3-apt doesn't work properly. So like your package installs, those are failing currently. That to me, I've reviewed it here this morning because I just found out about it today. It looks like the dependency isn't being properly pulled into the package. I believe the other thing that's probably holding this back is proper integration testing, which is assigned to me, which I just haven't had the time to do. I apologize. But effectively what we do with what Tiamat does is something that we actually use within GoDaddy ourselves. It's currently, like I said, in beta for SaltStack, but we use it within production here at GoDaddy. I have a modified Tiamat and Salt package repos that allow us to effectively run Tiamat builds throughout our environments on CentOS 6, 7, and 8, and Alma Linux. So what else would you like me to cover there, Sage? I was unprepared.
That's okay. That's probably enough. I don't know that we need to go too deep into it.
Right.
I mean, people have questions. So.
Yeah. Do people have questions about Tiamat? I mean, I can field those much more easier. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm totally putting you on the spot.
I have a question. What is the purpose of the Tiamat build?
So the purpose of the Tiamat build is basically just to provide a easier means of packaging the Salt code base and for deployment. So when you build Tiamat builds of Salt, you're actually getting the entire code base itself built. So a single binary actually will launch your Salt minion, your Salt master, your Salt SSH, all of that. They're not split into separate packages. If you wanted to do that, you could, of course, do that via a Wonder build and then package up the individual files into RPM, say. But it really just lowers the barrier to entry for deploying out the entire code base. I don't know that SaltStack has any higher aspirations for it. But for us, one of the problems it solves is we have teams within GoDaddy who utilize Python and require specific versions of Python being installed, as well as specific pip packages or system package and their versions being installed. Tiamat actually allows us to deploy modern versions of SaltStack out with Python 3 bundled into it, with security fixes applied, updated pip packages, system packages, and not have that interfere with our developers' environments. The only requirement being obviously that wherever you built the binary, libc needs to be equal to or higher on the boxes you're deploying it to. But yeah, it's a nice form of isolation, which mitigates a lot of issues for our developers as well.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, so if you are just testing, or for example, want to maintain sort at a certain level, then it might be useful. But for distributions, it won't be an option. As I saw, SUSE is doing it similar to Debian and also Ubuntu, that all the libraries need to be provided as package as well. So if there's a security bug in one of the libraries, then you just have to patch that library and don't have to patch all the applications that use this library.
Correct. You could do that with TMAT as well. You could exclude those system packages so that, and keep the package dynamic instead of using static X to make it fully static. And then you would just update those libraries or packages on the server. That's still possible.
Yeah, but in the case, if you bundle everything, if any component inside of that bundle needs a security update, then you have to rebuild that bundle.
Correct. Correct.
And that makes, if you just have one or two applications constructed that way, it's no problem, because then it's easy to maintain. But if you have hundreds or thousands of these, then it's not maintainable anymore.
Right. Yeah. So for system packages, like I said, that's somewhat easy to solve. You just exclude pulling those in, make the binary dynamic. For pip packages, if there are security updates, the goal, and this partially works currently, is that you can actually pip install or pip update packages within the binary itself.
Mm-hmm.
So in this regard, yeah, the project that Alex just mentioned, the VMjail thing, that we are using also for bundling salt in OBS, because we were trying to use Tiamat at some point, but problem we have is that Tiamat uses pip, and that's not allowed in OBS. In OBS, we get the dependencies as packages. So this way we are doing, we will basically pick the packages that we are going to include in the bundle, and ideally OBS, if there is a security update for one of the libraries that we are including on the bundle, OBS will know that it needs to read the bundle team, you know, because some of the bundle libraries were affected by a security update, and this should happen, or ideally this should happen. That's the idea, to happen automatically, you know. So to make it easier to maintain, you know.
Right. No, that's definitely. I feel like there's a story here I can write, or at least an issue I can open on the TMAT repo that can address some of that. I have some ideas of how we could accomplish that. I just really need to collect my thoughts there. Right now, obviously, TMAT's not really going to work for you guys, obviously. But that is something we should be able to achieve. Yes.
I think we could have went with Tiamat and changed it a bit more, but it would have been a bit more complicated than doing it this way. Because I think with Tiamat, I mean, it would be possible to use only offline sources. I changed Tiamat a bit to allow that back when I tried it out. So we could have installed all the dependencies and then used Tiamat in OBS to create the 1-dir. We wouldn't use the binary, but the 1-dir thing in the end. And that would have been very similar to what we're doing, just a bit more complicated, because we already had this Vim.js script from other SUSE products, and it was tested and it works. And then we decided, okay, it's very similar, but it's just simpler for our use case. And then we went with that. But Tiamat, yeah, it just wasn't as far along with all the boxes ticked that we needed, like bookkeeping. What RPMs or what pip packages do we have included at which version? So security can track what do we have, what do we ship, and what needs to be updated, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah. So I do know that you can list the packages that are installed in a Tiamat binary as of the moment. I will agree that the user experience of Tiamat is somewhat lacking at the moment, and that's definitely a note I can take away and discuss with whoever owns it currently at Salt. I'm not sure if that's Pedro or Tyler at this point.
That's a good question.
It's kind of just me in there right now.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. You and probably Pedro and maybe Curl or somebody. Yeah, there's just a
Right.
few people we do need, and it is still in beta. Just so
Right.
you guys are aware of this, we wanted to put it out there so people could go use it, so we could have some of these discussions, things that we hadn't thought of yet, ways that we're not using it that we haven't realized that we need to even address. So, but yeah, we can take that back, and we know that there's work to be done there, and that we probably need to think a little further on some of these tracks.
right. Yeah, so I mean, like, as for the can't use pip packages, I mean, ultimately at that point, you're talking more about trying to somehow include it into the FPM portion of builds with Tiamat. But yeah, no, I hear what you guys are saying. There's obviously there's still some rough corners on Tiamat and work that needs to be done to get it out of beta. I invite anyone to reach out to myself or I guess the members of SaltStack as well to discuss issues that they have encountered with it. Like I said, we use Tiamat pretty extensively here at GoDaddy. I kind of forced it down everyone's throats, but we use a dev test prod. It's worked out well for us. I realize it's not going to meet everybody's use cases currently, but we'll get it there for sure.
All right, good. Thanks a lot for the talks about the Tiamat. Well, we have 15 minutes left on the time slot, so maybe if you have some other topic or whatever you want to bring up to the discussion today.
I have a topic. I had the topic in my mind from last time, but now I saw that it's, I think, a very important topic. And it's the topic about the patches. To get have a project to get all the patches upstream. The Salt package in Debian has around 15 to 20 patches currently. There were times where the amount was double that, but seeing all your patches in OpenSUSE, that's
not that
much
bad,
more
right?
than we have. And the first patch that you mentioned, I remember that I'm not sure, but I think I wrote the patch to change the user. And the merge request is still open. I'm not sure if you did it on your own, or took the one that I wrote. But I like to see all the patches floating up upstream. I have a lot of merge requests open that are lying around. So that would make releasing newer versions simpler, because then we don't have to rebase our patches.
Yeah, so we do have the policy of bringing our patches upstream, and we try to follow that as well as we can, of course. For the Salt user specifically, that's also a topic in the security working group that next time, I think it's next Monday, next iteration, where we also want to improve the out-of-the-box security of Salt, including not running as root for the Salt master. And I guess we will take a look at that pull request or that patch then, and see what's stopping Salt upstream from accepting that patch. So yeah, we do pull requests against Salt master all the time, and it just can take a while to get the patches in. And I mean, a few of the patches are just for us because it's system specific stuff, but most of them are upstream, or maybe they are already merged but in a different version, because we don't track or we don't update our version that often. I mean, we try to be not too slow with it, but yeah, some patches. So what I tried to show was most patches or all new patches have a link to a pull request, and that should be upstream, so we can track it and drop it if it's merged. But yeah, bringing patches upstream is definitely very important.
Yeah, at some point we decided this is the policy. So for general contributions to the salt packet in OpenSUSE, we always require to have an upstream pull request to master. If in case that this is not like that, because of this is particularly for our package, or we don't want to have this in upstream, this is a special case, but not the general way. So we try to push always upstream first. But yeah, sometimes we need to carry those patches because those pull requests have not yet been merged and these kind of things. But yeah, um, yeah, we do upstream first. Yeah.
Same for me. I try to, if patches are needed, make sure that that I create an upstream merge request. But if I remember correctly, we have a bunch of patches that are not upstreamed. Some because of historic reasons, some because it's not easy to upstream. For example, we also built documentation. And for that, Debian has a policy that if you have a documentation, it shouldn't leak information. So if you browse that documentation locally, it shouldn't pull data from the internet. And so, for example, we replaced the included YouTube videos by just web links. And I'm not sure how that can be upstream, for example.
Okay. I was thinking on this upstream thing. Another thing that happened is that, the problem with the develop branch. So for example, we during some time, we were pushing the upstream, let's say, the upstream branch was developed, and we pushed and created stuff that were pull requests to develop. They got merged into develop, but then after the reshuffle of the branch strategy change on upstream salt, we got some pull requests that got, let's say, stales or orphan or some those commits, and those were not included into the next release. And now the requirement for the master branch are different than from develop. So now we need to implement unit tests, these kind of things. So that also makes some of the pull requests of patches to get not reach master branch, even if we have been running with those for some time because they went to develop and there is a porting that needs to be done and so forth. But yeah, and also as you mentioned, also for some historical reason, there might be some patch that is not pushed upstream, but at some point we went over all of them and tried to push wherever we consider that must be pushed upstream. So yeah. All right. Yeah, 9 minutes left. Do we have anything else? I wanted to mention for the next meeting, I'm not sure if someone of you from Debian, Gentoo wants to do, also some presentation or quick demo like Alex did today on how you are doing on your side, or how the particular release process is. But I also want, well, in that case, feel free to add there is a card on the community working group, or just reach us and mention that you want to present this on the next meeting, and then we can manage for doing this presentation. Another thing that I want to ask you is that about the OBS. So today, Alex, give you, let's say, a quick introduction where you saw OBS in the context of how we are using it for Salt, right? But I'm not sure if maybe you want to have, or we may have someone from the OBS team that in general gives you an introduction of the OBS tool for building in general, not how we are doing in the Salt team for building our Salt packet, but in general from the OBS team. OBS is a community tool. I mean, you can use it and you can build your package there. It's free, so it's open. So maybe, I'm not sure, a 15-minute, 20-minute talk from someone from OBS in general, how you can build even Docker images or whatever, container images, this kind of tricky things that OBS is doing that might help you on releasing stuff. And, so what does it feel? I mean, would you like that? Well,
It'd be good, but it's not a requirement. We could even dive into just more salt things if that's what people here want to do. We
okay.
go ahead.
No, I mean, if there is not such interest, it's perfectly fine. I mean, I think today we cover how more or less you saw how we are doing, how we use OBS for this, and that might help you. Yeah, I think in case that you want to gather some more information, just reach us or try with OBS. And I think maybe like a demo of OBS itself here makes not much sense outside of the source code.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, no problem. Then
You went on mute suddenly.
yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
So what else we have here? Let me take a look at my notes. I think that's more or less what we have prepared for today. Any other thing? No?
I think that's it.
Okay, fantastic. So I would say that we are over then. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thanks again from people that joined for the first time today, and also for Patrick and Benjamin that attended already this time. So thank you, guys. Yeah, so again, we will meet in 1 month. So I hope you have a great time until then. Happy hacking. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, everybody,
Bye.
for the time.
Thank you. Bye.